Awesome. I think
So,
we're expecting
Kate,
a few more people to join.
So we've been having a little chat in the meantime. I was explaining to some of the people who are not at all related to ArtCAN what is the point came about, and how we moved on from that to ArtCAN, and how we're coming up to 10th anniversary next year. So all of that is very good and lovely.
Had 2 very interesting planning meetings today for a program next year. Very exciting. I'm not saying anything else.
Well.
Yeah, a lot of work going on behind the scenes, but it's going to be a brilliant year. And these sort of conversations that we're having, especially this evening, are going to really input, hopefully feed into our sort of like plan and ethos, and how we actually make this integral to what we're just doing on a day-to-day level, as opposed to it being a one-off tick box sort of scenario. So on that note, I would like to say thank you so much to our speakers who are joining us this evening. It is absolutely brilliant that you are taking the time and sharing your knowledge, expertise, and just inspiring everybody to move that little bit further forward alongside you in addressing the issues that we as a world are actually facing. So we really appreciate, because I never think we should reinvent the wheel. I think there are so many people doing really brilliant things, and if we can collaborate and sort of unite in those sort of directions, and making sure that everybody is got the knowledge and the power to make those individual steps with confidence, then these sort of environments that hopefully will offer that platform and that knowledge, so that people are more confident in moving forward. We will do it united, as opposed to lots of different strands, which sometimes just gets disparate and people lose their way. So yes, I'm going to hand over to Catherine, who is going to be your host for the evening. Catherine, Lawrence and Hannah are the amazing curators of our virtual Breathing Out exhibition, but it is also they are the curators of these conversations and of these opportunities to explore what we all need to do to sort of move forward more positively, and actually to hopefully make some real definite change. So thank you so much to the curators. Thank you so much to the artists who have participated and actually being part of that story and that conversation, which is so vital in today's society. That's it from me. Over to you, Catherine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, one of the things we wanted to explain was the reason that we decided, we're missing Hannah today. She's not well, but she has obviously been with us all the way. Lawrence Mathias, Hannah Pratt and myself have been working on this exhibition and the ideas leading up to it for over a year, and lots of phone calls. And we just felt that we'd gained so much information along the way that we couldn't just stop at doing the exhibition. We wanted to share all the things we've learned with other people. And so we've called in speakers over 2 dates to talk about some of the issues that we felt were really important. As I said, Hannah's not able to be here today, but she's a scientist as well as an artist, and has been integral in leading us in that direction as well. Lawrence is multidiscipline, film, music, art, does a lot of political drawings. And I myself have done a lot of art related exhibitions and talks around human rights issue, which are what really interest me. So between us, from those 3 different angles, we created Breathing Out. And if you have time later, those of you who haven't already, please do check the link we sent you for the virtual gallery. And I would like to hand over, I know Tao is particularly keen to get off because Wales and playing England. So I'm going to let Tao go first if the other speakers are quite happy with that. We have Jordan McCullogh, we have Joseph Keppeln, I always say it wrong, sorry, Joe. Simon Joshua, who will be talking to us this evening. So thank you. Without further ado, I'm going to be really harsh as well on timing, because I know everyone wants to get off to see the rest of the football. So I'm going to be moving you on viciously. All right. So Tao, you're up next. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Kate. Special thanks to Lawrence. And yeah, thanks for the invite to come and share something of my world. For those that don't know, I live at the Lammas village in Wales. A very brief introduction. We are 13 years old. We are approximately 50 adults plus children living on 100 plus acres in the foothills of the Preseli's. And our mission is to explore what a sustainable lifestyle looks like. Now, there's quite a lot of resources about Lammas online, on YouTube, various places. So I'm not going to hash over old ground. What I thought I'd do today was just share some of the insights that I've kind of observed in my journey. And so yeah, so the first thing I'd like to share is that it is totally possible to transform a degraded landscape into something that is productive and abundant relatively quickly. Here at Lammas, we purchased approximately 100 acres of pasture. It looked much like ordinary fields, just blank green fields with the occasional tree in the hedgerow line, a few sheep. That's what the whole place looked like back 13 years ago. And if you walk around the Lammas village now, you will find a whole mosaic of gardens and orchards and coppice and woodland and small fields and patches of forest garden and little paths, and it's turning into kind of like a Garden of Eden. I don't say that lightly, and it's been an honor to kind of watch the process over the years. I've watched the insects return, and then the birds follow, and then the mammals followed them, and to the point where now it's quite common to see hedgehogs and otters, whereas before it was completely unheard of. Now we've created this change through a combination of permaculture or intelligent design and human scale stewardship, which kind of leads on to my second point, and that is that it is totally possible for human beings to live a modern lifestyle as part of a balanced ecology. Now, one of the things that we have to do here at Lammas is we have to measure our ecological footprint annually. And so I can say to you with a kind of degree of science backing me up that I live a one planet footprint, a one planet lifestyle. And if everybody, as we all do here at Lammas, and if everybody in the world lived a one planet lifestyle, the Earth would be in ecological balance. Now, one of the ways we've achieved this is through enabling a personal relationship with our resource base. When we turn on the tap or open the plug, we know exactly where that water comes from and exactly where that water goes, because we regularly maintain the spring head and we watch after our reed beds. And that, having witnessed lots of people transition from a mainstream lifestyle to a land-based off-grid lifestyle, that's kind of key in creating behavior change. People will change their lifestyle if they've got a direct relationship with the land base. Now, I live a modern lifestyle. I've got fridges, freezers, we've got laptops, washing machines, power tools, blenders, scanners, printers, etc., etc., etc. I use a car. But how we square that is that most of my time, most of my activities are drawing carbon out of the atmosphere and locking it into the soil. But how we transform this landscape, this degraded pasture, into this abundance is through growing biomass, growing plants, composting them, building soil. So that's how that ties together. Now, the third insight that I'd like to share tonight is that a sustainable lifestyle creates space for expression. Now, the mechanics of living sustainably are all tried and tested. You know, the designs for a hygienic, comfortable compost toilet are all out there. Renewable electricity, it's all been done before. Like you said, Catherine, we're not reinventing the wheel. The mechanics of sustainable living are all tried and tested. But what sustainable living does is it creates a sense of empowerment and resilience and independence. You know, living up here in the hills, we don't really care who's the Prime Minister. It makes no difference to us whatsoever. You know, when there's glitches in the food supply systems or the energy systems, it really doesn't affect us that much. And that empowerment creates a sense of space. You know, yeah, we work hard, yeah, it's physical, but it's not drudgery and it's not endless. We have lots of space in our lives here and we have lots of freedom. And so as a result, there's a wide range of expression here, musically, performance, art, culture is really thriving here. And that's not only heartwarming, that kind of reflects a kind of the bigger message that I observe. And that is that, you know, taking a step back, our society is not in right relationship with the natural world at the moment. It is unsustainable, it's gone awry. When I watch people transition from a mainstream lifestyle to a land-based off-grid lifestyle, part of that transition involves redesigning the relationship with our natural world, but it also involves redesigning our relationship with our inner nature. That's an intrinsic part of the journey towards sustainability. Yeah, and having witnessed lots of people undertake this journey, I'm always surprised that more people aren't taking this journey. And but you know, for my part, it's an honor to live here. I feel absolute privilege. It's an absolute joy, and thank you for giving me a bit of space and time to share a little bit of that with you tonight.
Has anyone got any questions for Tao? I'm keeping an eye on the time here. We've got 5 minutes of questions.
I did just wonder whether or not how open it was for if people just rocking up, or is there sort of like a process for people to sort of get engaged with the community or to have a plot on the community, or how did that sort of work? It must have started quite organically initially.
Yeah, it did start quite organically. We have clear funnels for people who want to visit and engage with us. During the summer, we run guided tours every Saturday. We have a volunteer placement scheme if people want to come here and volunteer, or there's a range of courses available to people. But one of the things that's come about as a result of our activities here at Lammas is that the Welsh Government have adopted a wider planning policy initiative called One Planet Development, which enables other people to go and create a sustainable lifestyle for themselves, either as a single household or as a small group or as a larger eco-village. And so there, you know, we are just a part of a much wider movement in this part of the world of people returning to a land-based off-grid lifestyle. And that's a wonderful feeling, and that's a wonderful community to be a part of. So, you know, I think there are lots of roots in, not just to Lammas, but into this culture, into this alternative land-based living. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Anyone else like a
Catherine, we
question?
should do a post maybe on ArtCAN with sort of links tomorrow.
We will
following
do.
all of
We've
our
got
specific-
Hannah and I've got it.
We've got planned.
Got it in
Okay,
the plan.
fine.
So James has got a question over there.
Oh, can't hear you.
We can't hear you, James. You're not muted. You just need to put your volume up or something. There we go. That's better.
That's it.
Is that any better?
Yeah, perfect.
Super. Sorry, nice to meet you, Tao. Thank you for taking the time to explain to us your project. Just the one thing that caught my attention there, and I'm kind of new to off-grid living and learning more about it. Not that I live off-grid, by the way. That's probably why I'm asking this question. You mentioned about the Prime Minister. Now, it doesn't matter to you who the Prime Minister is. How do you take decisions at a community level?
In a way, that's a really good question, and that is one of the more challenging kind of aspects of kind of stepping out of the system. Here at Lammas, we have explored all sorts of mechanisms for self-governance, from representative democracy through to sociocracy, through to direct democracy, through to elements of anarchy. And I wouldn't say that we have the answer any more than any other alternative has the answer, but I would say that it is an ongoing exploration. But I think that the key to it is coming from a place of kind of compassion and compromise, and the fact that we're kind of all in it together makes a difference. You know, there's more commonality amongst us, not just in our shared land resource base, but in our kind of vision and intention, in our perspective on the kind of mainstream. There's a lot of commonality there, and so that creates functionality, and that's in a way more important than the mechanics of a system. You know, the different forms of democracy or moving towards consensus, that's where you fall on that spectrum is less relevant than recognizing commonality. That's what I'd say.
Super. Definitely something to think about. Hopefully I'll get to visit you at some point in the future. Thanks for answering.
Great. Good.
I think we're going to have to leave it there just because that was exactly on 20 past. Thank you. So I'm thinking a nice segue there actually would be Jordan, be coming from a more corporate type of background. It would give a little bit of balance to this conversation, if you're all right with that, Jordan.
Yeah, it's great to be here, folks. I'm a little bit different in my accent. I do apologise in advance of the Irishness, as Catherine's very well used to, and I know James, we haven't talked. However, I do know emails have been going backwards and forwards, and hopefully you can get that. But dear Dutch, my name's Jordan. I'm from Uisce. Uisce is the national utility for water in Ireland. Uisce is Irish water in Irish, just in case you're wondering what that there means. And as I say, we are a government agency here in Ireland to safeguard the future of water for the country. Now, I did have a little video very quickly to show because it's a nice sort of way in. So I wonder if I can share, optimize video clip, share sound. That's what we want to do. So my
I'm not seeing it yet.
desire to safeguard. There we go. Oh, it says it might not allow me to do it. Hopefully you might. That there ways. Yeah, it doesn't want to work with us. Apologies about that. But essentially, what we want to do is we have over 370 water treatment plants here in Ireland, and looking from a different scale, obviously from a macro lens, you know, we have to ensure the safe drinking of water for Ireland and that there. I think all of us around here, if I said you didn't drink water in your daily diet or any sort of diet, I think we'd all laugh, and you know, it's a bit of a lie, but we do drink water. Sometimes you take it for granted, essentially how important it is for a sustainable future when it comes to how we obviously go. My role here in Irish Water, I know it's a bit strange too. I'm a senior HR business partner. I'm a human resources person. So why is a human resources person talking about sustainability? Well, I am one of the people who look after the sustainability here in Ireland. And what we kind of do is we look at how we change and develop and lead the enterprise-wide approach of delivery of a corporate sustainability and innovation agenda to ensure Irish Water achieves our targets of becoming a sustainability exemplar here in Ireland. We're going through a lot of transformation at the minute, like any big organisation, as I'm sure you're all very aware of things that go on and so on that ways. We are acquiring 4,000 employees from local authorities or council staff here in Ireland. And that's everybody from the person digging the hole in the road to fix the pipe, which leakage is one of these things that we always talk about, and we have great stats. And I'm not going to bore you with loads of stats because, believe me, they could come out of my brain at this point when we're about leakage and so on that their ways. But we're making small step forwards to making water available to everybody in Ireland, because there is areas that do not have water there, and making it safe for people to drink. You know, we want to ensure that it's obviously embedded in our DNA, sustainability. And here at Irish Water, we do have a very high appetite for sustainability. We sit at the Euros, which U in French means water. And we sit over in Malta, we sit at many European parliaments and so on that their ways. And, you know, we really are driving it forward. Under legislation here in Ireland, we have to meet certain things. And I'm glad to say I got results today that 99% of all water in Ireland is safe. And that is one of the key things. But this all feeds into, you know, why am I talking about this here? The ecosystem in Ireland's very green, in case you hadn't noticed, and it's this green emerald isle, as many people call it. And obviously with that, there's a lot of rain, of course, and rain is water. Water comes from the ocean, evaporates, and as you know yourself, falls and so on that ways. But then we look at how do we treat water? How do we ensure that it is safe, and how do we embed and nourish that there? I talk about water an awful lot, but it's just not water. It's how do we ensure that we are sustainable for a future? You know, there's stark statistics out there currently at the minute that we are the highest energy user in Ireland in the government who use obviously electricity. To make water safe, there's a lot of electricity used in the background in what you would call your wastewater treatment plants. These are the UV lights. And, you know, we do take steps to put in place. So over the next sort of vision of the next 2050 vision, we are working towards how do we ensure to cultivate our own places. Water treatment plants are big, massive places up in the hills in many valleys. So we're thinking, obviously, wind turbines is a very high-end sort of thing. And we're thinking, obviously, how do we ensure that we have water filtration systems for many different areas in Ireland, and also the replenishment of our pipeline system here too, so it reaches everybody in a safe, conditionable way. Sustainability is, as I say, at the heart of our organisation. We recently employed, believe it or not, she only started there this day last week, the head of sustainability and innovation in Irish Water, and she will be driving us forward to net zero by 2030. She'll be putting all these lovely stats out there to the governments and to the European Union as to be compliant. And, you know, we're not perfect. I can safely say that from the very start and outset here. We're definitely not perfect, but we're definitely making smaller steps to get to where we need to be. And especially as the nationalised water utility in Ireland, we're the only national utility in Ireland, and we take great pride, and we want to ensure that we are that sustainability exemplar. It's very that there. Obviously, I was going to show my little video, which would have took up the next 3 minutes to get us there. I'm more than happy to share after. And, you know, it would have been a great start to that there, because it obviously portrays what we are here as a utility. And like, I don't even like to call us a utility because we're a partner.
It's a sort of eco-climate changey stuff. chat.
So we're a partner to the Irish population, because utility means we're trying to make money out of it. We're not making any money out of it. Our money comes from the Department of Housing to ensure that we have full systems in place. So, you know, it's not about making money. It's about ensuring that we provide safe water for the future for everybody across the island of Ireland, and keep it green, essentially, is one of the main things there. And you know, I've looked at some of the art and stuff, obviously, and in the gallery online there, and it really brings through, you know, the different aspects of climate change and how it does. Over the summer, for instance, we have preparation. Plan B is what we call it, or what we did call it, of what happens in the case of drought, for talk's sake, because obviously we had a very warm summer. Ireland is not a very warm place, but we did have a very warm summer this year, and you know, there's only so much water we have, and we have it on so many days in our reservoirs and so on that ways. So we're looking at ways, how do we cultivate that sustainability aspect in regards to that too? And we are safe. Of course, we've always got the supply there. However, it's how do we make it safe and safeguard it for the future? And if I say safeguarding one more time, I know Catherine's going to murder me, because I sent her emails about safeguarding in the Scouts, which is my other side of this here, is that, you know, I have a social responsibility like Catherine, and I know I saw James's name there, ways. We have social responsibilities as Scouts across the world to ensure that we make the place a better place than what we found it essentially out their way. And that's one thing I've always brought into my roles in any organisation, is we always are here to leave the planet in a better place than what we found it. And that's what drives me to continue on here each year, and to try and do that and bring that forward.
Thanks, Jordan. I tell you what, this is maybe a bit of a, before I ask anyone else if they've got a question, I'm going to sneak in one of my own.
Okay.
I was just wondering, with all the history of bogs being drained and issues around that, is there any connection at all in the water sustainability plans around that?
Yeah, so the European Union give us water sustainability targets that we have to meet and so on that ways. And, you know, there is places that obviously have had history, and we're quite fortunate here in Ireland that we've been quite good with our water. The main thing here is it's safe water when it comes to that there, because obviously we have safe and unsafe and sanitary and unsanitary, and as you can imagine that there ways. There's a lovely thing I love to call a BWN, which is all these lovely acronyms they love to use in our partnerships, utilities, things. And BWN is a boil water notice, and we're steering away from them. And you know, it might sound strange whenever you talk about these things, but certain things affect water, and whenever it rains really, really hard, it actually affects the drinking water quality across the system, whether that be in any place around the world, because I look at it from a perspective of obviously in Ireland, but you know, also in England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, Europe, and so on that their ways. And we're very fortunate that we have a very good system here. There is systems around Europe, which I'm sure there's plenty of you here from Spain anyway, that their ways I know, and I have connections in France and stuff that ways. And you know, the water systems aren't great in some places, regardless or where you go there. But yeah, we definitely do try to put things in place to try and make things better for the future.
Thank you. Lawrence has got a question there.
Thanks, Jordan. That was really interesting. In the light of what Tao, our first speaker, was saying, and very interestingly, the thoughts about micromanagement of water systems, an introduction of multiple, a great variety of potential little reed bed systems, or a biodiverse system which would manage water. Are there any plans incorporated in Irish Water's outlook with regard to that sort of a green infrastructure and a micro infrastructure approach to things, as opposed to a larger corporate rollout using existing infrastructure, which is possibly compounding aspects of the problems we have? So is there a more radical way into looking at the future in terms of, you know, something more ecologically sound, perhaps?
Yeah, no, of course. And someone actually brought it up to me the other day, is what we call grey water. And for some people might know this, it's obviously untreated water essentially back into systems and so on, that ways to be used for the likes of cleaning yourself, for showers, for baths and so on, that their ways. We are looking at plans. Currently in Ireland, the water distribution is very, I want to say, distorted when it comes to how we're doing it. We're going through currently, as I say, yes, it's a very corporate thing, I want to say, a transformation program, because it's the way it is. Historically in Ireland, things haven't been done right here. However, Uisce Éireann was set up in 2014 under the Oireachtas, which is the parliament here in Ireland, under the Water Act. And essentially, we every other council in Ireland have water specialists in the councils. So we're now bringing them together. So this is the first step, is bringing the councils together to work under ourselves as like essentially the national utility. From that there, our plans are to bring weed-based systems, bring different biodiverse systems into how we harness water, how we filter the water, and how do we actually grow more sustainable, because as you know, a wastewater treatment plant isn't a very sexy or appealing looking building at the end of the day, that their ways. So how do we actually utilize what we've got and make it better? How do we utilize the space around what we've got, but also what does that look like by 2050? I can't really go into much more detail than that, because this is something that is going to be released publicly after ministerial sign-off here in Ireland. However, I do know, and I can assure you, it's a lot greener in the future.
Thank you, Jordan. Unless anyone else has a burning question, I'm going to move forward to Simon, if that would be good. Thank you very much, Jordan.
Thanks.
Okay.
Oh, I do have someone who's got a burning question.
I have got a burning question because I live in the southeast of England, and we have massive sewage discharges into our water along the Kent coast. And I just don't understand how you can sort of just isolate certain aspects of water and not consider the whole cycle. We've had bogs were mentioned just now. We've had marshlands drained in order to stop coastal erosion. We now understand that those marshlands are really necessary for emitting carbon into the atmosphere. And what I find difficult to deal with is these single issues. And I'd love to know how you actually radiate in a more complementary way.
Certainly, I could spend all night going into that, but what I'll do is, with the permission of Kate and Catherine, because we could spend all night doing that, I'll come to you separately on that, by all means, and we can exchange and have a chat and set up a Zoom call in regards to that, and we can go with that then.
Thank you.
No worries.
What we're planning to do is we're planning to make the recordings of this available, because a lot of people I know couldn't make it tonight. And Hannah, Lawrence and I are planning to put the links of various projects that we found along the way and reading material, to sort of a further reading list to everybody. So if Jordan, you send any links, or I'll say if you're fine with that, we can pass phone numbers or whatever. We can do that at the end as well. Okay, so thank you very much for that. Simon, over to you.
Hi there. I'm going to try to share the screen. I don't know if that works or not.
It should do it. It worked last time. There we are. Lovely. Yep, it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm absolutely not an expert in soil science or anything that I'm going to be talking about, but what I'm talking about is stuff that I have kind of learned or picked up over the years in gardening, and also running community gardens, but also as an allotment holder. I'm currently working for a charity which is called My Yard, and most of the work that we do is centered around food. We collect surplus food from various sources, such as supermarkets, Amazon, bakeries, etc., and redistribute to particularly social housing and people in sheltered housing. I should say that I live in Northwest London. I work in Northwest London in Harrow, essentially. We do a little bit of stuff in Hertfordshire and Barnet. I'm also a ranger for London National Park City, which is an organisation, it's a worldwide organisation that's setting up national park cities across the world, and London was set up as the first one. The key to what I'd like people to think about is something which probably comes as a massive surprise to most people. If you look at some of the research and the data that's available quite easily, soil extinction is something that could become fact, which, okay, we're talking about water before, but soil is another component that's absolutely essential in terms of permaculture and life itself. We can all do something about this. Obviously, on a large scale, commercial agriculture is key to all of this, but on a smaller scale, in our own gardens, if we have small holdings, if we're working allotments, there's a lot that we can actually do to reduce the impact on the soil. And traditional methods, or when I say traditional methods that are currently used, are creating the problem. Particularly on an allotment, you'll have a lot of people who are overworking the ground. They need to add a lot to the soil to keep it alive and productive. There's all sorts of systems that you can use, which are based on permaculture, that are much kinder to the soil, and you're then working in harmony with the things available to you. So one of the things that I try to do with my plot is actually not bring in very much in terms of materials, try to use what I actually have on the site as much as possible. One of the reasons that I'm involved with this charity is primarily because food waste is a massive contributor to climate change, and it doesn't matter where in the world that you are, it's usually up there in the top 3 contributors of climate change. But more than that, I just feel that it's something that we can all do something about, and we can do the same thing by the way that we use our gardens, the way that we're using parks in cities, and green spaces across the country. If we use these spaces more with more consideration to maintaining soil health, for example, we're dramatically reducing our impact on climate change. And it's something that I feel is within pretty much everybody's grasp, that it's something that we can do, whether it's to do with gardening and food production, or just reducing how much food we're throwing in the bin. Can all have a massive impact. When we're talking about gardens, in an urban environment such as the one where I live, there are a lot of homes where gardens have pretty much disappeared. I mean, the worst possible scenario is that they're paved over entirely or concreted, or people feel that they need to have stuff like astroturf to make them look pretty. It doesn't need to be a wild space. I'm not convinced that the discussion in urban areas is to talk about rewilding quite often, like rewilding grass verges and all this kind of stuff. There's a massive problem with that, in that people living in an urban environment want neat and tidy, but that's quite possible to do while increasing biodiversity, while conserving water on sites, while conserving water in green spaces. It's something that we can, again, that we can all do in our gardens on a small scale, and actually have a massive impact. Area covered gardens in this country is enormous. One of the techniques that I try to encourage people, particularly on allotments, to use and in community gardens is no dig gardening, because you're then releasing a lot less carbon into the atmosphere, and therefore reducing your impact in terms of climate change. But more importantly, to me, you're actually building the soil structure using these sorts of techniques. If you see people rotating year in, year out, they're actually destroying the soil structure, and they find it very difficult to grow anything after a relatively short period of time. So they have to add things like a lot of organic matter, manure, etc. Once you have a system established, the beginning is probably the hardest bit. Once you have a system established, if you're composting most of your green waste, you should be able to really minimize the amount of material that you're bringing onto that site. Something that we can also look at is food forests. I mean, that sounds like it needs huge spaces, huge areas, but it's actually not. On a small scale, you could probably use these sorts of principles on a balcony. In a small space, it's perfectly possible, and certainly on a space like an allotment, using these sorts of techniques is incredibly productive. I would love to have a small holding in Wales, but I'm here in northwest London, and the best I can do is try to bring some of these techniques onto allotments into our garden. And what that's basically doing, I mean, we have a problem with flooding in this area. By increasing biodiversity, by planting trees and shrubs together, by not just having grass, for example, I've managed to pretty much solve in a small area the problems that we've had with flooding and retaining rainwater. I'm trying to encourage people to look at, when they're building extensions, for example, to look at building green roofs. It's also something that's not difficult to do. I've spoken to architects who say it's perfectly possible to incorporate that into designs, yet we hardly see any around here. One of the things that most people have easy access to, and sadly around here we have a lot of in public spaces like parks and street trees, for example, they have a habit of cutting them or reducing them. It's not really pollarding, but they have a habit of reducing them because people seem to have an issue with falling leaves and fruits, etc., and they're worried that there's going to be damage to properties. However, the positive of that is that there's an awful lot of wood chip available, and that's a resource that I think people could use more and more, particularly in allotments and gardens. When we're talking about gardening and improving soil health, we do need to use some sort of improvers or fertilizers, but that doesn't necessarily mean chemicals. There's all sorts of techniques that you can use to improve productivity of vegetables and flowers. There's a list here. I've used most of these things, and I like to try different techniques and see what works and see what doesn't work, and particularly in community spaces, it is a point of discussion for people that it's something that probably they've never heard of, producing, let's say, a fermented plant juice or plant teas, but they really are fascinated by the sorts of things that you can actually do with stuff that's basically around you, and these are in really urban areas. I mean, I'm talking about social housing estates, where we've had people build wormeries, and they're collecting leaves rather than worrying about how they're going to get rid of leaves at the end of the year, and they're reusing kitchen waste and using that in their little beds that we help them build. I like to give people a little bit of hope that the talk of climate change and the lack of action by the government, certainly on the local scale, the lack of action in Harrow is pretty depressing. But I think you can give hope to people if you can explain to them what they can do in their own lives, and that's one of the things that I wanted to do with this talk. That it's not the grand scale that I'm talking about. It's what you can actually do at home, whether you're living in a block of flats or have a small garden or are lucky enough to have an allotment. There's something that everybody can do, and we're then talking about the masses rather than the small percentage of the population. We're talking about the majority of people, and I don't think enough attention is paid to this. You know, not everybody wants to rewild their garden, but there's ways of planting for nature which looks stunningly beautiful, but actually serves a fantastic purpose in terms of providing food and breeding sites for wildlife. Okay, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much, Simon. Yes, does anyone have any questions?
I have one. It's a practical one. Sorry. Being an allotment holder, why proceed with caution with wood chip? I saw that on that particular slide.
Okay, so there's a couple of reasons. The main one is that it can actually remove nitrogen from the soil. So if you don't use it correctly, it can actually have a negative impact on the soil. So you need to understand how you're using it.
Yeah.
But certainly in an urban environment, we have plenty of it. Sadly, in our area, most of it goes to produce energy. In other words, it's burnt. Whereas I think if we kept it local, and it's unfortunately it's not even burnt locally. If we kept it locally, again, we're reducing transport. You know, there are all sorts of things, all sorts of positives on that.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Anyone else like to ask a question?
Yeah.
Lawrence?
With regard to the really quite shocking statistic of soil degradation, and you know, the fact 75% of UK soil is potentially classed as not living, it doesn't pass the organic standard of 3%. Do you think there's any wider acknowledgement of that problem in farming, agricultural circles, in government circles, or is it just business as usual as far as you can see?
I get the impression that because I used to live in Oxfordshire, I spent a lot of time with people doing large scale farming. I think they do understand that. I mean, that they understand soil better than anybody else, I guess. I think for most people, it's a really shocking statistic. I don't think there's enough attention given to something as basic as this, that most of our soil is useless unless we add a lot of stuff to it. And on a small scale, if you look at people's allotments, and I see this where you can see it on a small plot, where if the soil is overworked, you have problems with flood. You have problems trying to grow anything. In the summer, it's baked like a brick. In the winter, it's completely waterlogged. If you have decent soil structure, you don't have that problem, and you can have that problem on one plot, and next to it, if you have a better soil structure, you don't have any flooding. And people wonder, you know, they're scratching their heads, why is that? Well, it's fairly obvious, because you've destroyed the soil. It's not able to function correctly.
And is that sort of compacting the soil through kind of over digging, pressing down over?
It's not just compaction. I mean, it's removing. You're pretty much removing all the organic matter, the bugs, if you like, that are in the soil breaking down organic matter, helping to feed the plants. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the soil that we can't actually see, bacteria, fungi, etc., that we hear about how important it is, but you can't see it. But if you've destroyed the soil structure, all of that is gone. It's completely dead. So that when you try to grow anything in that ground, it doesn't work terribly well. And then the immediate reaction is to go reach for fertilizers and all this kind of stuff, which actually isn't helping at all.
Thanks, Simon. I guess it's interesting, isn't it? Because for years, people have been turning over the soil, especially in large commercial ventures, and then adding phosphates. So where did the idea, because I also visited a farm in Spain where they were also doing a no-dig policy. Where did that sort of come back again?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I'd be interested to hear what Tao's doing on his plot, and you know how he would consider the soil structure or the soil health using the techniques that he's using. But I don't know. I mean, I know my mum was a very keen gardener, and she used to spend days and days digging the soil, and it had to be done every single year. But then you have to put a lot of compost back onto it. I feel that using no dig, you're adding very, very little. I mean, you're basically top dressing plots normally. You're definitely not digging it in. And within a year or two, you can see the difference. You can absolutely see the difference. And I have people on my allotment site that were very skeptical. I mean, the first thing that they wanted to do was rotivate, remove weeds, all this kind of stuff, and it really doesn't help. I mean, you end up with a bigger problem with weeds, for example. I mean, when I'm talking about weeds, I mean stuff that would stop you from growing anything, basically. But yeah, within a year, I would say that I've pretty much solved any problem with even things like bindweed. Without any herbicides at all. It's just by mulching, and also keeping things like green manures growing over the soil during the winter if I'm not actually growing anything, any crops.
And could I just come back with regard to what you just mentioned, Simon, and your experience, Tao? I know that on Keith's small holding, which was another small holding I visited, he was kind of assiduously doing no dig, and he using hay bales for some of the growing as well, planting directly into that. Is your approach similar in that respect? Do you follow a sort of no dig policy with much of your cultivation? Although, yeah,
pretty much. I mean, I won't dig over a bed unless I'm having to dig out a root crop. But you know, so for example, when I've got potatoes or parsnips or yacon or something like that, then that's when the bed gets kind of properly dug over. And I think there's a kind of place for digging. You know, sometimes I think not like proper digging with a spade or a fork, but just like a little bit of kind of scuffling on the surface or hand turning over with a trowel. Particularly this time of year, if ever you watch kind of badgers are the rotivators of the forest, and they'll go and they'll just kind of scuffle around, sniffle, but that's really good. That's kind of that turning action. It you know, there's a place for it, but I'm in total agreement that in principle there's no point in just digging for digging's sake. All you're going to do is compact and destroy. But I think, yeah, there's a balance point. And coming back to the, you know, to what Simon was saying, mulches, green manures, understanding how soil mechanics works in terms of like fungi and all the creatures, yeah, this is what we should be teaching our children in school.
I think also the use of mixed types of plants as well. I mean, even if you're talking about vegetables, if you have things like the parsnips, I mean, they're deep rooted and they're helping to create a better soil structure. If you're growing, this is a frustrating thing about a lot of our parks, that utility grass has a very shallow root system, and the soil structure of that area is absolutely terrible if you go a bit further down. So you're not getting things like water retention. So a lot of these areas will flood. If you grow mixed species of plants, then you're really helping the soil structure, and therefore water retention, you're reducing flooding, etc., etc. So all these things just follow on, but you need to get the basics right.
Thank you, Simon. As a wonderful segue, Joseph, our next speaker, also has a farm. So as well as talking about technology, I'll give you a chance to say what you were going to say first, Joe, but we may have a farm-related to and fro at the end of this. So can I pass over to you?
I definitely agree with all the conversations, and as you know, yeah, it is actually becoming commercial. So it's good you're talking about it. It is the no tiling principle, or what they call the seed drilling and everything. It's being demonstrated at a commercial level, and it's starting to work at in large scale farming. So it's something which I think the whole industry is taking into account what no digging is and how it's improving agriculture. I'm going to share my screen and talk about something very differently. So, can everyone hear me correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Okay then. So I'm going to talk about how tech changed our climate from a more futuristic perspective. Okay, so I'm going to look at things which kind of opens up a little bit of imagination and possibilities, and the kind of things which you know, could be definitely happening, and how that technology is going to change our climate as we go forwards. Okay, so the objective is, in 20 minutes, let's see how technology changes our climate and how we can invest towards a sustainable future. And one of the first things I think is good to get everyone involved in, so we can get a little bit of thinking happening, is something which happens in futuristic thought. Anyone can log on to this and join in, they can see this. But one of the things that is done usually when we talk about new future things is actually imagining the whole situation and playing it out. And the best way of doing this, and we can all actually be involved in this, is actually thinking how our life would be in 10 years' time. Because if we talk about 2050, everything seems very distant. But if we talk about 10 years' time, it's a lot easier to start thinking about what would it be like if we really wake up in the morning, what technology changes our climate around us. So what is something that we think would really be an impact or be very different from what it is today in 10 years' time, and kind of simulate that perspective of how we do that. And this is something actually which futuristic, or should say strategic people's work on the whole time, is actually trying to put in perspective how these things can actually happen. So there's a little area where we can actually, anyone who wants to log on there can actually put their thoughts of what technology would change their life the most in the year 2033 and have an idea about that. Okay. What could the climate look like in 2050? So this is just a possible simulation. Obviously, we don't know it, but these are kind of some figures that we can run around. So we could be a planet of 10 billion people, would have a lot of hectares of Arab land, would have 221,000 square kilometers of buildings, 4.5 million bikes maybe, 50 billion solar panels, hell of a lot of solar panels running around, 952 zettabytes of data, which someone can tell me what a zettabyte is later. And food-wise, as we were talking about food, algae becomes a big issue. It's been studied already for a long time. We've got 2 billion tomatoes being grown, fishes, an amazing amount of fruit trees, beehives, and autonomous tractors. And so what I've done in the presentation, I've just made a quick a little video. I'm going to walk through all the different areas that we could actually, where tech would actually influence that kind of area of our life. Okay, so what we're really trying to do is, in 30 years, there's a lot of changes that have happened which we kind of take for granted, or we don't think they're so important. So, like, for example, mass adoption of the internet, equal gender rights. Looking back, and we're seeing it, there's a lot of, should we say, related things which we take very much for granted, which has changed our life already in 30 years and how we take about it. And so the question is, how is that technology going to really change our life, as towards the future? So I'm going to try and run through the year 2050 and what things are going to play a major part on this, okay? So one of the big things I'm going to look at 2050, I want to start with, is artificial intelligence, for example. So it's a part where doctors and pharmacists are starting to develop individual specialized diagnosis and solutions to our human life. So the way we consider doctors and patients and how we as humans live together is going to be much more integrated, because we've actually got artificial intelligence, and this is already happening nowadays, creating drugs and pharmaceuticals, solving viruses. We had the big, the COVID situation, where actually computer simulations were creating different strains and combinations of solutions to actually cure people. We've got machines could execute about 100 trillion data points in about 1 second. It's a hell of a lot of atomic level decisive making of how medicine can actually be made and how people can interact with each other. And all these obviously affects how, the climate we're going to be in, because obviously we could actually even have people downloading a brain conscience of somebody into a network, onto a system, and how we neurological connect to people and how we can connect with, interconnect our brains with actual computers. One of the other big industries is the housing industry. So we've got buildings, and the building sector is a huge sector where everything's going to be about retrofitting. So we're not going to be thinking anymore in the year 2050, do we retrofit our house into an energy conscious way? Our houses, pretty much, I reckon 90% of houses will be retrofitted. There's all new systems coming out there on how we seal houses, how we have heat maps, how satellites will look at our environment around us, what's the best way of that house to be built, how the building will affect the environment around us, how the materials being used can be recycled. Most materials probably won't even be virgin materials, they'll probably be recycled materials, be it from the food industry or carbon captured, for example. We can actually, there's building materials already being made from CO2. And a lot of these things we're talking about is combining, obviously, solar and housing. The transport sector. So in transport, it's a huge revolution. We're all talking about electric cars, and transport's going to be something of a hobby maybe in the future. We're going to be driving for fun. We're no longer going to be transporting ourselves and driving like we used to. Autonomous vehicles is really the way we're going. We're going to be mixing our biking, maybe traffic, rush hour traffic will be a thing of the past. We're going to be connecting ourselves in a much more efficient way. We're going to be having charging stations maybe popping out rather than going to certain places, because you no longer need to charge on your way. You're probably charging when you're leaving your house. So that changes your concept of how you travel. And especially as we go forwards, there's things like hyperlooping and, should we say, quicker connections with low consumption. So all these connections of connecting cities together through quick tunnels or frictionless magnetic systems, where we can actually go from one place to another in a much more, should we say, quicker transport, or a combination of public biking and car on demand will be, I'll say, our daily, our everyday life. And one of these big projects which is already being talked about right now today is a 250-mile crossing of India in 30 minutes. The energy sector, I think we all know about the energy. We've had 100 years of fuel and carbon, should we say, using petroleum and coal. It still is our biggest consumption. Natural gas is still one of our biggest consumers and our issue. But the amazing thing is that actually solar electricity, or should we say clean energies, are the cheapest way of making energy still at the moment. So we can thank our engineers for, in 20, 30 years, they have produced a form of making energy, which is the cheapest form that exists in our system. But the reality is that in the last 10 years, we've actually consumed more fossil fuels. So even though more renewable energy is actually on the market, our fossil fuel consumption from 2010 to 2020 has actually increased. So we've got to carry on looking at this. Fusion energy will probably be possible by 2050, which is very different to nuclear energy, which hasn't really made a big change to the sector. But our combination of smart grids and interconnection and how we look at it, it's going to be solar, wind, and fusion hydrogen will be, coming up and maybe being thought of as being possible in the year 2050 as we go forward. The next one, which I'm going to be talking about, is the space section. Okay, the space revolution towards space. And the reason I talk so much about the space one is it's because even though we think maybe that space is such an aspect which doesn't affect us on our planet, it's something which is a really big money industry. So in the last 10, 20 years, space travel is being reduced. By 2030, we're going to have people being able to go to the planets, so especially to go and habitat our higher skies. And the real money issue is that, there's thought of how we can actually start mining and how we can actually start creating environments around us, and how we can actually start bringing back and working, looking at the combinations of possibilities of actually habitats on other planets. So something like this in 2050 will be something which is very, it won't be science fiction. We're already getting towards those sections right now. They've already mined a certain parts of some asteroids over these 3 or 4 years ago. Okay, food and biotech, which we're speaking a lot about right now. We all know that vegetarians, or should we say the sector of how we use meat, is going to be something which we're all considering. So meat reduction is a major part of our going forwards. We're going to be seeing more vegetable related products. We're going to be seeing printed food being created. We're going to see in supermarkets a combination of different foods, which will be less demanding on our agricultural land and more diverse. And so the combination of actually printing food and creating genetic food, although it sounds maybe scary in a kind of way, but genetic modified cropping and should we say vertical farming as we go forwards will be the combination. At the same time, I think that there will be an emphasis on biodiversity, and the farms which are around us bring in wildlife and environmental quality will also assist. But as, like it or not, as we become more urbanized, the option of actually having buildings which have farms, or should we say fresh product being produced 365 days a year in a closed environment and with less water or less soil needs, is something which will have to solve our urban needs as we go forwards, and the world carries on urbanizing and creating larger metropolitan cities. For the last two areas I'm going to be talking about is climate change, obviously, and I'm going to be finish off the presentation when I finish this video talking about really that if we don't do anything about climate, it's going to be something which affects us every day. The people will be moving, we'll have huge migrations if we don't solve the problems from a worldwide perspective. We're talking about, there might be 260 million people migrating from one place to another, 1.2 billion people displaced by higher seawaters, higher wildfires, more droughts, more desertification, less, should we say, more hostile environments. And that whole environment really is something which we have to address. And so, as you all say, it's all these things we're talking about. If we don't look after the climate and we don't, take these into account, it will have a real cost to our whole society. Okay. And finally, in our kind of go forwards a little bit quicker, nanotechnology and the areas of new materials. Most materials probably won't be virgin related. We're already talking in the building sector, and for most possibilities, that a lot of waste products or foods or fibers, all those things can actually be made into, should we say, new materials. There's a lot of reuse of plastic, and how from a nano level we can actually work with these different products. So if I go for did 2050 technologies, did it save us? Well, this is kind of phrase I've written up. I would say it's a little bit like this the way at the moment. We've kind of survived it. We didn't escape climate change or solve global warming, but we had a wretched half century, but better than a catastrophic one. We danced nimbly, but we haven't fallen yet. And I know Catherine says she don't want it to be negative, obviously, in this presentation. So the real three possible outcomes, the way I see it, is that what we have is either we look at the bigger pie, and technological evolution really does give us, a green energy solution where we are more efficient, we reuse the materials, and we create new solutions to things, so innovation. We simply have fewer people, or we have a better humanity and we think of things more in a global aspect. And the three kind of answers to this, and just giving, adaptation to what these areas or solutions would look like, is if we're talking about innovation in technology or technology affecting climate, by adopting renewable energy by 2050, we're actually saving the world 12 trillion. I know these are really huge numbers, but I mean, it just kind of gives perspective into things. The faster we innovate and the faster we actually start, thinking that it isn't business as usual, we start changing into this case, the more we save. So when people talk about the huge cost of actually addressing the climate, we're actually going to save money the more we, the quicker we address it. Since the Paris Agreement was done, 3.8 trillion has still been dedicated to fossil fuels. And one of the last data that came out of the last COP meeting, sadly, the last COP meeting was the largest lobbyist meeting by fossil fuel companies. They had the most people sent by fossil fuel companies to COP21, and the most resources by oil and gas companies went to that actual COP meeting. And the reason they're doing this is because actually they're feeling the change is actually happening. There are innovations, and so which can solve large amounts of our problems. And there's one that I just recently read, which was the 16-kilometer dig towards unlimited geothermal energy. This is something which could come about maybe in the next 5 or 8 years, and it would give an unlimited source of energy solution possibility. And obviously, as we talk about, there's a great UK company as well called Arrival, which is making factories at a local automated level, where literally the whole factory is automated, and using its local resources is actually deciding how it actually builds its electric vehicles and companies. So we have to also push towards, there will be an oil and gas collapse. Oil and gas is peaking in 2030. The quicker we go towards the green wave, the better it will be, and the better, more possibilities we'll have. Less is more. Really, the less poverty we have, the smaller the families are around the world. So, less people is a real possible outcome. Acts of nature such as floods and droughts have actually toppled historically a lot of nations and dynasties. So it's a very interesting data. If you look at economic data for like 500 or 1,000 years, sometimes most of those dynasties have actually come down because of climate reasons. Education of girls increases productivity and improved contraception. It's a way of declining fertility rates. There's a lot of talk about the planet is unlimitless and we keep on growing and there's more people, but actually population, the population will probably die off in the year 2050 or 2100. So we might not be 10 billion, we might be 8 billion, and that obviously requires a lot less resources. Sending money to the poorest actually works really well. If we actually send small amounts to people who actually don't have anything, they're actually really productive and use it in very efficient ways. And finally, from a globalist, less nationalistic thought, if we globally eradicate diseases and distribute income to more to poorer countries and think about energy security, and we take into account the core materials to reduce fossil fuels, or we do nothing, like I said before, by doing nothing, we're actually spending 318 trillion more by 2050. So I always say, what the things we could work in or invest in is, we can all work in 3 areas. Invest in stocks and pensions. So if you've got investments and you've got savings, you can really work towards the areas of green energy, clean mobility, water systems, sustainable food and circular economies. We can really lobby. The oil and gas companies lobby towards using their solutions. We can lobby the other way around. The more we lobby towards cleaner energy, the better. If we inspire other people to find new business opportunities, we're going to create solutions for everyone. I've seen paint companies who were totally dissolvent and chemical based go down the organical path, and seen as great business opportunities, which and getting ahead of the game of other companies. Our reduction of consumption is something which we're going to have to think about. We can't just carry on our process of consuming and just taking in more resources. And as the last one I always find is education is such a great area. The more we encourage youngsters to innovate and think about the real big issues, I think the quicker we're going to get to having more pressure or bigger solutions done before 2050. I think humanity has its amazingness that problems which we see as problems today can disappear very quickly in 5 or 10 years when we actually innovate and find solutions towards them. And that's about it.
Well, thank you. There is so much to ask around there. I'm going to give other people a chance first. Who wants to go first? Lawrence, thank you.
That was really interesting, Joseph. Thank you for that. There's a whistle stop to it, but there's so much information. It's very much corporate and industry driven, I think. Is that right in making that assumption with the way you perceive change in the future? And in balance again to both Simon and Tao, who are looking very much at a individual and a more micro managed, personally incentivized environment. You're thinking more in the big corporate structure of things. And I noticed also the space race feature, which you mentioned briefly. At the moment, that's an enormous emitter of CO2 into the atmosphere. It's a huge problem, and yet it just seems to be escalating issues like that. The one thing that did sort of unsettle me a little bit was the kind of headlong rush to embrace technology, and also perhaps not fully restraining some of the excesses that these headlong rushes are kind of inducing at the moment, things like space race and other aspects of it. And in terms of reducing the fossil fuel load on energy systems, there's no real seeming inclination to do that at speed in order to meet that kind of speedy engagement with the future. What are your thoughts on that aspect of things, the big corporate rush ahead?
I mean, I've been involved in renewable energies for about 15, 20 years. And I always say that sadly, most of the times, finance, or should I say money, takes a big part of all decisions. And I would say still today, right now, most governments are thinking about energy independence as the big issue, rather than greening or climate change. It's not that they don't know about it, definitely know about it, but it's not the biggest issue on the table. So one of the big changes from an energy perspective is, we like it or not, energy is very politicized and actually creates a lot of security from a country level. Regarding the solutions, I think it is definitely a combination of all three. It's not one of the three. It is, we definitely have to consume less. We probably have to consume maybe 50% less resources than we are today, going towards the future. But that doesn't necessarily mean that by reducing our consumption, one of the big issues was when Europe started talking about renewable energy was, do we start producing less? Do we become less productive? Do we think about restraining ourselves in certain things? And what they've found is that actually you can actually be innovative and think about new solutions and new ways of doing things, and that actually does create more opportunity. So one example is, for example, like the clean energy. By implanting more solar and wind energy and reducing obviously our coal and our oil base and our natural gas base, we are actually going to be reducing our daily costs. So we're going to have cheaper energy in all our houses as we go forwards, and that's something we have to take about. The space one is something which is, I definitely agree, it's a complex one. Some technology changes are difficult to know how far they're going to reach us. We all live by GPSs and the first space race towards the moon, and so much technology and so much of our everyday living, of our mapping and our satellites and our simulations of even climate change come from all that technology, that we would have to probably add up all those parts together to know if it really is a cost. And one of the things on the third is levelized cost is something which we can't talk about cost on a short term. We have to really talk about cost in a 10, 20 year period or comparison. One of the big figures I was talking about is the oil industry costs in rents about 1.5 trillion in rents to coal and natural gas and oil companies. And when we talk about always clean energy, and when we always compare one energy to another, they always take about the cost, and they always say, oh, but that cost at the moment this much, but they don't take about the whole, how long does it take to build a nuclear power station? It takes 20 years pretty much to commission. And most of the projects that get commissioned, out of 100 projects, maybe 10 get finished. And the amount of cost that gets involved in that whole process just gets lost and isn't talked about. So I think, yes, it's a combination of all three, definitely. And I think I'm very much involved in the housing industry. And whenever I talk about should we have more solar panels or not, I always say yes. But the biggest thing you can always do first is reduce your energy consumption. That's the most important thing. Rather than producing energy, it's reducing energy needs and then covering what isn't covered.
Anyone else like to ask a question? Surely you must all have loads of questions. I have. Yes.
Yeah, Simon here. I don't know whether we all talk about solutions, but then again, there are critical points about planetary survival. And one is the functioning of ecosystems. So in other words, the carbon and the water cycle. And one of the cycles is the oxygen cycle, oxygen production and loss. And 2/3 of our oxygen comes from the phytoplankton, the plant plankton and oceans. And so if we continue to acidify our seas, we could kill off the phytoplankton, and that would be, well, a planetary death would be so we could kill ourselves off. Do our leaders realize what's going on? Because the pH of our seas is changing. I mean, this is not a question of conservation or improvements in industry or green innovation things. This is sheer planetary survival. We rely on the oxygen given off by plants. If we kill off our oceans, we kill off the phytoplankton. Does anyone realize that? That's my question. I'll just put it out there because.
Yeah, no, sorry, Simon. If don't mind me just cutting in. It's the increasing acidification of the oceans, I think.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and that would be something to do with global warming. Obviously, that's carbon dioxide being absorbed into the oceans.
Yeah,
I will do it for you. Give me 5 minutes so you can watch that shit.
Oops. Anyway, I think that's the key kind of thing that we're wondering about, Joseph. It's the microsystems and current ecology. How is that going to bear up with this surge ahead, which is envisaged if the oceans acidify, and we are left with these enormous problems, which will be intractable, possibly in a very short space of time?
I think out of the three solutions, it would be nice to say that the third solution of globalization and harmony and thinking from a world perspective would be the way to go forwards. But in reality, from an economic perspective, and as we're living today, and probably for the next 5-10 years, the world goes through stages of more nationalist and more globalization. We've gone through a period of globalization. I think we're going towards a period, at least for the next 5-10 years, of more nationalism. And the reason for that is because people are getting worried about what they can control and what they can actually influence. And that aspect is more about how I control the environment more local to me, even though, as you rightly say, both of you, it's not a local problem. It's a worldwide problem. So I can't see the next 5-10 years short term politically or economically being that way. I mean, really, it kind of looks like it's not the way it's going to be going for the next 5-10 years, but it's the way it should be going. We've had a fossil fuel race for the last 50-100 years, which has created loads of wars and problems. We may have again a lithium war race where China at the moment is, like it or not, one of the biggest lithium mining holding countries. And electrification and battery storage and all these solutions comes because we play nicely with China. And so that's a reality that we're dealing with right now. That's one of the things that the space, they're looking at space of, having extra resources. Lithium might not be the solution, so lithium might disappear and we don't need lithium anymore. So I definitely think that what is definite, and Tao will say it, and we all say it, I live, and as Catherine knows, on a very micro level. So even though I talk about this on a macro level, I live in an organic farm, creating organic vegetables, no digging, and experiment with all the concepts. But I think at the same time, we have to always think that solutions have to solve the worldwide problems as well. We have to feed 10 billion people and have 10 billion people without arguing or having wars or living on the same planet in a healthy kind of way. I think that, sometimes it's not a question of technology or climate, it's a question of how we actually solve these things. I think we pretty much have a lot of the solutions that we already need. It's actually interpreting them or, getting into action.
I think just to follow on from Joe there, the idea is to use every resource we have to change. And so if technology is an option, which it looks like it can be, then we should be using that. I think we can't, it's wonderful what Tao's doing, but not all of us have a chance to live that way because we don't have access to that type of, to the land to do it. So we also have to work on a global level to create the big solutions, which very often will come through technology, such as the alternative fuel generation. But I do think that we have back to our personal responsibility. It is down to us using less and also being well educated, because I have so many conversations with people who've just picked up a headline and have gone with an idea, but haven't looked at the whole circular narrative behind a problem. And it's back to, which in many ways we can see right now with immigration. People are frightened of migrants. This is leading back into this idea of nationalism, but people aren't looking at why are they leaving and what we could do at a root level to stop them leaving, because they don't really want to go. No one wants to leave their home. And so unless we look at things with a bigger picture and really inform ourselves, we aren't able to grasp the change that needs to happen. Anyone else like to ask anything or add anything? We all good? Is that a wrap? That it looks like it might be. I know a lot of people are desperate to go and watch the remains of the England-Wales match. So
started.
I know it's already started. I've had my son going up and down the stairs making faces at me, so I know. So I would just like to really thank all of you. We will, like I said, have this further reading sheet, and I would ask that the speakers send me any links that would like to be shared. We're hoping to put this, if possible, on, can we do it on we're looking for a platform we can share it. At the moment, we'll be keeping all our recordings on a Google Drive that we've got, but we're trying to see if we can make it more popular, more public, so that you can then share it to other people that you would like to see it. And we will get all the information of almost a year's of curiosity of finding projects, from people rewilding, rebuilding, to people coming up with small scale solutions, such as one of the ones I really like is there's a Swedish charity that, for example, create water like big containers to help, so that people who have to go get water a long way in Africa, but on the side of it is a solar panel, which then heats the water and makes it safe to drink. There's a lot of small things out there. So Lawrence, Hannah, and I have got a whole list of information that we've gathered over the last year that we'd love to share with you. So with nothing further to say, unless Lawrence would like to say a thank you.
No, just a huge thank you to Simon, Joe, Tao, and Jordan. A great mixture of really interesting discussions and really thoughtful presentations. So terrific. Thank you very much. And yeah, that's it. I think we can all go. Yeah. Thanks a lot. That's great. Thank you.